I met a couple of people who are in the Defence Force and spoke with them a little bit about some of the issues, or was made aware of some of the issues that they were facing too, with their mental health especially, having served overseas and done some things that, the rest of us just couldn't even begin to comprehend.
Talofa lava, I'm Madeline Chapman, editor of The Spin-Off. Welcome to Behind the Story, where I go behind the scenes of a big article on the spin-off from the week. If you want a weekly rundown of some of the best reads from the spin-off every Saturday, make sure you sign up to the weekend newsletter. Today I'm talking to Ātea editor Liam Rātana. Liam has reported 2 stories recently on the same topic, a topic that is so often ignored by both media and everyday New Zealanders. Veterans. Our returned or retired army personnel are at the sticky end of almost every social measure: unemployment, mental health, suicide. But without even a national register of how many veterans we have, it's even harder to tell the stories of a community that hasn't been quantified yet. Liam's work covers the recent Waitangi Tribunal hearings into the treatment of Māori veterans, as well as a veteran group's call to boycott the formal ceremonies of Anzac Day. Here's Liam Rātana on Behind the Story. Kia ora, Liam. Thanks for being on Behind the Story.
Kia ora, man. Thanks for having me.
You've written a couple of stories recently about veterans in New Zealand particularly, and obviously with Anzac Day being today when this episode comes out, you had one published yesterday about the call for a boycott of Anzac Day. Can you just give a really quick rundown of what the call is, who is kind of behind it, and why?
Yeah, so the call itself isn't to fully boycott Anzac Day as an idea, but more so the, not celebrations, but the services that are held throughout the country. So as we are all aware, there's a bunch of services that are held, normally dawn services, but sometimes 10 a.m, midday, throughout the country at various locations, RSAs and cenotaphs and places of memorial. And so there's a group called No Duff, which is a charitable trust that was set up by 2 ex-veterans. And they kind of fill a hole or a gap that's left by some governmental services or agencies, such as Veterans Affairs, sort of helping to care for veterans who have returned or left the force, returned from service, and might be struggling with certain things in their life. So veterans struggle with unemployment, some of them have disabilities, and mental health struggles is another major one. So the suicide rate for veterans is quite high. So No Duff sort of fills that gap in terms of being able to help connect veterans with support services. Quite often they'll refer them to these agencies, these groups that can provide or are resourced to provide professional care and support. So yeah, what the call is about is they feel, No Duff, and feel that these organisations aren't supporting veterans as well as they could, or as well as they should be. And they feel like there's been a failure from the government to care properly for people who have left the Defence Force and consider themselves veterans. And there's a whole raft of issues behind that and things that are going on behind the scenes. There's been inquiries and reports made and calls for change for a long time now. If you ask No Duff, they'd say that no meaningful change has been made. And if you talk to the government agencies, they say that change is ongoing. So yeah, that's the gist of it.
And one of the interesting points I found from the No Duff co-founder who you spoke with was the fact that there is no current registry of veterans in New Zealand, which kind of seems pretty crazy. Like every other group, whether it's race, sexual orientation, disability, has some idea of just how many people are in this community and therefore how many people may require assistance or something. And so that was a big issue, was that there is no current registry for New Zealand veterans. That feels like part of the reason why there's almost this kind of nebulous community of people who aren't really reported on that much, people who don't have the support they need in the way that the US, places like the US, which obviously have huge military forces, but they talk about underserved communities being ethnic minorities, disability, maybe the rainbow community, and veterans. And that's not the case here. Is that kind of, do you have like a particular connection to wanting to tell these stories, or did you just see it as a kind of, there's this whole community that isn't really having their perspective shared in mainstream media?
So the first part of that is, it is quite mind-blowing that there is no central register for people who have served with the New Zealand Defence Force. I listened to the most recent week of hearings for the Y2500 inquiry, which is all about Māori in the Defence Force and their treatment post-World War II. And yet, when I realised, or when I heard that fact being discussed, that there was no central register, it was really dumbfounding. And Aaron Wood, who I spoke to from No Duff, highlighted that again recently for this story, saying, isn't it crazy that there's an employer who doesn't know who it's employed, where they've worked and what they've done? And in this modern day, that is quite an insane thing when you think about it. And so I think the fact that it's only been opt-in for some time has fed into the lack of data, which goes to what you're speaking about, the lack of awareness around some of these issues. They don't track how many veterans are committing suicide or how many veterans are unemployed. It's people outside of these organisations who are gathering that data and then trying to make a noise about it. So, I do have a connection. My grandfather was in the A Company of the 28th Māori Battalion, and I was fortunate enough to grow up with him for some time, and always admired his pictures hanging on the wall in his pensioner flat in Avondale, of him in his uniform looking very slick. And as a kid, the idea of war is quite glamorized, I want to say, glorified. And so I always used to pester him about the war and wanting to see his medals, and sometimes, he'd pull them out. On a very rare occasion, he might pull them out and show me the medals. So that's sort of my link into this. And I had other uncles, great uncles and stuff, who have also served in the Māori Battalion and overseas in World War One and Two. So that's sort of been the genesis of my interest in wanting to, I guess, cover these things. And then I actually saw a story from another outlet about a case that's ongoing regarding exposure to Agent Orange, which is like a defoliant that they used in the Vietnam War. And Sir Weta Gardner, who is quite a prominent Māori figure who passed away not so long ago, he was in the process of taking legal action against the Defence Force for his exposure to Agent Orange, which he alleged led to him having brain cancer, which he eventually passed away from. So, I saw this report and I found that really interesting. The inquiry was on, and I tuned into 80 hours of that, and it was really quite mind-blowing, just the sheer range of issues that veterans face in Ātea. And like you say, overseas, and especially in the likes of America, there's quite a lot of awareness and pride in their veterans and their defence force. Here in Aotearoa, I think we think of the Māori battalion and those from the Second World War and the likes as our veterans, our defence force, but we don't really think about what that looks like in a contemporary setting here in Aotearoa. So yeah, also recently I met a couple of people who are in the defence force and spoke with them a little bit about some of the issues, or was made aware of some of the issues that they were facing too, with their mental health especially, having served overseas and done some things that, the rest of us just couldn't even begin to comprehend. And so that was, again, something that I think has fed into me wanting to take an interest in these stories. And, yeah, it's led me down a pretty interesting path.
Yeah, I have that idea of this also being a community that suffers higher rates of, suicide, mental health struggles, things like that, which is, as New Zealanders love to trumpet, is something that we all care a lot about. But there does seem to be a real lack of potentially awareness or acknowledgement of just how much it impacts the veteran community. And my relative, who's a reasonably young veteran, will every Anzac Day often point out that he has a few friends from the army who have died in service, but far more friends who have died since returning by suicide. And that's kind of the very quiet after effect of the service, where most people would consider New Zealand Army service to be relatively less dangerous compared to other military services around the world. So is that, I guess it is, there aren't people out there whose whole job is, reporting the stories and the issues and the struggles facing veterans in New Zealand. They don't even know how many there are to be trying to report on. Is this something that you would be looking to kind of continue to look into and potentially be somebody who is able to kind of shine some light on some of those issues?
Yeah, I think tuning into the Y2500 inquiry hearings for that week really sparked something within me, or sort of just made me aware of how many issues there are in this area, and like you say, how underreported those issues are. So yeah, can't say it's something that I set out to do intentionally, but maybe just by default, really, I've come to report now a couple times on these issues and have educated myself just a little bit. And I'm sure that there are many people out there who are far more aware and educated on these issues than me. But yeah, I would like to keep exploring some of the topics and issues here and sort of representing the people that, are underrepresented in this area. Suicide, the lack of cultural awareness that has long existed in the Defence Force, unemployment, all these issues are quite, really, really as intense as and important as you can get. So, yeah, I definitely am interested in continuing to cover these topics and these issues, and if that ends up with me being some sort of authority in this space, then so be it. But yeah, definitely not my intention. But again, really, well, personally, I find it quite important for us to shine a light on these issues, yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Liam. And I think that is kind of quite a timely reminder of, as many stories as there are reported, there are just so many that haven't come to light yet, or people just haven't been, hasn't come across the reporter's radar. And things are considered important once they feel like they've had the airtime and the awareness, and that is kind of a sort of undercurrent that you try to ignore because it can be quite daunting, but in a lot of journalism work of realising like, oh, if I don't write this, then potentially no one writes it, and then it just carries on being a complete unknown to everyone. So appreciate your work on telling these particular stories, both of which can be read on the spinoff.co.nz or Google Liam Rātana, the spinoff. They were both published in the last couple of weeks, so they'll be pretty near the top. But thank you, Liam, for being on Behind the Story.
Cool. Thanks for having me.